Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu dan saudara sekalian. Terima kasih sudah datang walaupun sedikit mendung. Jadi berjuang di tengah kemacetan dan cuaca. Kedengaran nggak suara saya? Kurang. Gimana kalau sekarang? Oke, great. Yeah. Jadi saya ulang ya. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu semua dan juga saudara sekalian. Terima kasih sudah datang di pagi ini, walaupun mendung di pagi hari, di acara kita mengenai seminar mengenai empowering migrant workers. Jadi bersama kita ada dua pembicara kita yang akan menjelaskan mengenai studi yang sangat menarik ini. Jadi sebelum saya serahkan kepada mereka, jadi saya akan memperkenalkan mereka berdua terlebih dahulu. Jadi saya sambil lihat contekan ya, soalnya saya nggak hafal. Jadi mungkin saya akan memperkenalkan ladies first dulu. Jadi Dr. Simone Schaner. Jadi Dr. Schaner adalah asisten profesor di bidang ekonomi di University of Southern California, dan sebagai seorang ekonom di bidang ekonomi pembangunan, penelitiannya berfokus pada migrasi internasional, health seeking behavior, dan juga pengambilan keputusan dalam rumah tangga dan persimpangannya dengan inovasi dan akses keuangan. Beliau juga merupakan salah satu profesor terafiliasi DEPAL, Bureau for Research and Economic Analysis of Development, the Center for Effective Global Action, dan Faculty Research Fellow di National Bureau of Economic Research atau yang lebih dikenal sebagai NBER. Di sebelahnya yaitu Dr. Firman Witoelar yang merupakan saat ini adalah Fellow di the Indonesia Project di Crawford School of Public Policy, College of Asia and the Pacific, Australian National University. Sebelumnya, beliau pernah menjadi direktur risetnya Survey Matters dan juga ekonom di grup peneliti ekonomi atau DECRG di World Bank dan Washington DC. Dan dalam 10 tahun terakhir terlibat dalam pengembangan dan implementasi Indonesia Family Life Survey. Jadi kalau yang sering pakai AFLS, ini apa? Gemboknya. Terus dan juga merupakan di AFLS sebagai salah satu peneliti utama. Jadi Dr. Firman memiliki gelar doktor di bidang ekonomi dari Michigan State University dan sempat menjadi Rockefeller Postdoctoral Fellow di Yale University. Jadi mereka berdua adalah peneliti utama dari studi mengenai migrant workers yang akan disampaikan hari ini. Jadi setelah perkenalan ini mungkin saya akan langsung berikan waktu dan tempat ke Mas Firman dan Simone.
Terima kasih, Linda. Saya berdiri aja atau duduk ya? Berdiri, saya bisa lihat. Sekali lagi selamat pagi dan terima kasih banyak bapak-bapak, ibu-ibu, semua rekan-rekan atas kehadirannya. Senang sekali kami mendapat kesempatan untuk bisa mempresentasikan hasil studi kami yang sudah mulai cukup lama, dan kita akan lihatkan timeline-nya kapan kita mulai. Dan juga saya ingin berterima kasih kepada semua pihak-pihak yang dari awal ikut turut memberi masukan, memberi support kepada studi ini. Teman berdiskusi, Migrant Care, SDMI, Government, World Bank, Bappenas, semua stakeholder yang ikut memberi masukan dari mulai kita mendesain studi ini sampai ke lapangan, juga partner kita di lapangan, juga Survey Matters dan Mitra Samia. Senang sekali kita sekarang bisa mempresentasikan hasil yang saya harus ingatkan bahwa sifatnya masih sangat preliminary, karena datanya, data dari airline sendiri baru terakhir kami dapatkan Oktober 2019. Jadi ini masih benar-benar fresh from the oven, masih jadi itu harap jadi catatan. Kami juga sangat senang bisa mempresentasikan studi ini pada saat yang timingnya menurut kami yang adalah sangat penting, sangat pas, di mana kita semua di sini tahu bahwa sebagai kelanjutan dari Undang-Undang tahun 18 2017 yang berkaitan dengan migran, akan ada perubahan, sudah mulai perubahan yang mendasar, transformasi dari bagaimana proses migrasi dilakukan, baik dari segi kelembagaan maupun implementasi di lapangan. Jadi dengan mudah-mudahan hasil yang kami bisa ungkapkan pada bulan ini bisa jadi masukan pada saat yang tepat tentang dan ikut membantu memberi arah atau memberi input seperti apa nanti implementasi dari undang-undang tersebut, karena kami tahu saat ini pun sudah mulai banyak turunan peraturan pemerintah, Perpres, ada peraturan menteri dan lain-lain yang semua diarahkan untuk mengimplementasikan undang-undang yang baru. Nah, sebagai sedikit ini sedikit tentang kami, research team kami, saya di University di Schaner di Melbourne, Simone dan UNC dan saya di EDU, dan ini adalah partner-partner kami di lapangan, Simone dan Kami, dan ini proyek ini tidak akan bisa tanpa bantuan dari pihak-pihak yang tulis ini. Oke, saya akan langsung mulai tentang motivasinya, dan kita yang hadir di sini saya rasa juga sudah memahami secara umum apa yang menjadi apa isinya. Kita tahu bahwa remittance migran Indonesia punya peran yang besar sekali dalam mendatangkan pendapatan atau devisa, dan salah satu datanya tahun 2018 remittance-nya nilainya 11,2 miliar atau sekitar 150 triliun rupiah, kira-kira seperti itu. Dan Indonesia adalah dengan angka itu adalah negara 14 terbesar penerima remittance di dunia. Dari segi jumlah migran yang imigran Indonesia yang ada yang bekerja di luar negeri, kita melihat bahwa baik jumlah maupun share dari perempuan migran yang bekerja di luar negeri mulai meningkat, meskipun sempat turun setelah ada moratorium untuk pergi ke Timur Tengah 2011-2012 yang lalu. Dan jumlahnya ada sekitar itu, dan proporsi perempuannya sekitar 70%. Nah, kita tahu bahwa bagaimana remittance ini memberi sumbangan yang besar, tapi pada saat yang sama kita juga aware, kita juga tahu betapa pekerjaan ini mengandung risiko yang tinggi, risiko terutama bagi pekerja-pekerja dengan low skill, bisa risiko dari di tempat kerja, mendapat perlakuan yang tidak adil, risiko kekerasan, risiko eksploitasi ekonomi. Dan kalau kita ikuti isu ini, kita tahu bahwa kerentanan mereka itu tidak hanya di luar negeri, tapi sudah mulai sejak mereka masih di dalam negeri. Jadi dari proses rekrutmen, proses pelatihan, dan selalu ada kerentanan untuk mereka tidak mendapatkan pelayanan yang seharusnya, informasi yang seharusnya, pelatihan yang memadai dan sebagainya. Ini merupakan isu yang sangat penting dan menjadi perhatian kita semua. Untuk sebelumnya, tadi saya sudah bicara tentang adanya rencana untuk perubahan landscape, perubahan peraturan dan bagaimana proses migrasi. Ada baiknya kita sama-sama lihat dulu apa yang selama ini terjadi, apa yang adalah status quo dari bagaimana proses migrasi berlangsung. Jadi secara umum aktor yang memegang peranan penting di sini adalah kita tahu di sini ada peran yang sangat besar dari BPTKIS, yang mereka secara ofisial mereka yang merekrut, mereka yang melakukan matching antara demand dan supply, mereka yang melakukan training dan persiapan pemberangkatan, dan pemerintah di sini berfungsi juga sebagai punya kewajiban dalam soal tata kelola, dalam soal pengawasan, dalam soal koordinasi, dan juga pada PAP. Dan selain kalau ada isu penyelesaian masalah-masalah. Di luar itu semua ada peran sponsor yang sebenarnya tidak, yang pada prakteknya ini memegang peranan penting, di mana sponsor ini menjadi perantara antara PT dengan calon migran. Nah, ini adalah pola yang selama ini terjadi status quo-nya dalam negeri, sedangkan kemudian di luar yang perannya adalah tadi PT yang mempekerjakan dan menggaji PMI atau TKI. Nah, jadi pada prakteknya sebenarnya interaksi antara PMI sendiri atau TKI, pekerja migran Indonesia, dengan pemerintah itu tidak interaksi terbatas. Bagian besar interaksi ini telah terjadi antara mereka lewat sponsor dan PT. Ini adalah proses yang selama ini kira-kira secara garis besar saja status quo-nya. Nah, dengan undang-undang yang baru, Undang-Undang 18 tahun 2017 ada isi baru, ini semua ini dirubah. Dan ini gambarnya ini memberikan general framework seberapa jauh ini akan berubah, karena masing-masing aktor sekarang punya role yang beda, di mana pemerintah, khususnya peran pemerintah baik pusat maupun daerah juga berubah. Sebagai contoh, sekarang di tingkat lokal dari tingkat kabupaten sampai desa itu akan memiliki kewajiban untuk menjadi pintu untuk menyebar informasi, untuk memfasilitasi pekerjaan, jadi melihat job opportunities-nya. Dan juga ini penting di sini adalah mereka yang akan bertanggung jawab pada pelatihannya. Dan perintah pusat jadi perintah pusat akan bersifat sebagai mengidentifikasi demand, lalu supply-nya, pemerintah daerah make sure bahwa supply-nya memadai dengan pelatihan dan sebagainya. Dan role dari PT sendiri berubah, dan mereka perannya sekarang adalah untuk melihat pekerjaan di luar negeri dan kemudian melakukan koordinasi untuk pemberangkatan dan kepulangan. Dan di luar negeri tetap akan ada peran agensi di sana yang menjadi jembatan antara migran dan employer yang mempekerjakan. Nah, ini dan kita akan ada beberapa perubahan karena BP2 TKI juga bertransformasi menjadi BP2MI, misalnya lalu BPP KIS juga nanti akan disebut sebagai B3MI, dan ini sudah ongoing, persiapan sudah mulai berjalan, sudah berproses. Dan ada beberapa dan bervariasi kesiapannya antara satu daerah dan daerah lain. Nah, kembali ke penelitian ini dengan melihat konteks kebijakan yang seperti itu, dengan melihat landscape yang sedang berubah, kita penelitian ini berusaha mencari jawaban atas 3 pertanyaan riset utama. Yang pertama, kami mencoba memberikan gambaran yang detail, yang cukup kaya tentang pengalaman TKI atau pengalaman PMI, seberapa jauh mereka mendapat pelayanan atau seberapa kurang mereka mendapat pelayanan yang baik, dan bagaimana experience mereka sebagai migran. Yang kedua, kita berusaha melihat apakah intervensi yang dilakukan tentang intervensi informasi yang kita lakukan bisa mempengaruhi pengambilan keputusan PMI, dan apakah pada akhirnya apakah ada perubahan perilaku yang meningkatkan. Pada akhirnya ini yang kita peduli adalah apakah well-being PMI improve, menjadi lebih baik, dan juga bagaimana apakah ada pengaruh dari intervensi ini terhadap pasar migrasi tersebut. Jadi ini adalah research objektif yang utama dari studi. Nah, sebelum kita masuk ke nanti Simone akan membahas soal desain penelitiannya dan hasil-hasilnya. Ada baiknya untuk kita melihat dari hasil studi kami, mencoba melihat bagaimana pengalaman migran dari data yang kami kumpulkan. Dan ini untuk bagian ini kita akan menggunakan data yang kita kumpulkan dari sekitar 1025 pekerja migran dan yang berbulan di daerah kontrol saja. Jadi di daerah-daerah kontrol yang menjadi studi kami. Ini adalah daerah sebagai dan ini kita berterima kasih kepada BNP 2 DKI yang juga ikut membantu untuk mengidentifikasi daerah-daerah studi kita dengan melalui data ini. Nah, di daerah ini adalah daerah yang tingkat migrasinya tinggi dan kita mewawancari perempuan pekerja migran yang bermigrasi yang telah bermigrasi sejak atau setelah Oktober 2015 di 8 kabupaten ini. Nah, karakteristik dari sama tersebut seperti apa? Demografi profilnya umurnya adalah 34 tahun, 32% hanya lulus SD, 50% lulus secondary school, 9% tidak menikah, 70% dari migran tersebut sudah menikah dan secara rata-rata mereka punya satu anak yang ditinggal di rumah. Dan meskipun kita tahu ada moratorium dari hasil studi dari sampel tersebut, kita lihat sekitar sebagian besar perginya ke negara-negara Asia Timur, meskipun masih cukup banyak yang pergi ke Middle East. Dan kita tidak secara spesifik mensurvei domestic workers, tapi kalau dilihat apa pekerjaan mereka yang mereka lakukan di luar negeri, 70% mengatakan mereka melakukan pekerjaan domestik, ada sekitar 10% yang melakukan mereka elder care, babysitter dan lain-lain. Jadi ini masih kita lihat ini konsentrasi tetap pada domestik dan mostly low skill workers. Ketika kita tanya bagaimana mereka pergi ke luar negeri, kita ingat tadi di skema yang status quo, sebenarnya peran yang paling penting harusnya adalah migran berhubungan dengan PT untuk kemudian dikirim. Nah, dari sini kelihatan bahwa baik mereka yang pergi ke Asia maupun MENA, peran dari sponsor masih sangat besar. Jadi ada 74% di mereka yang mau pergi ke Asia tetap menggunakan jasa sponsor. 78% yang MENA lebih tinggi. Jadi hanya 17% di contohnya yang Asia yang menggunakan PT untuk pergi ke negara-negara Asia. Dan ini perlu kita ingin memberi sedikit fokus di sini. Kalau dilihat bahwa ada sekitar 10% dari mereka yang pergi ke migran, mereka hanya lewat sponsor, tidak melalui PT, dan 7% yang lewat jalur lainnya. Dan beda yang cukup signifikan dibandingkan dengan mereka yang pergi ke Asia. Dan bagi kami ini adalah angka yang menunjukkan mereka yang pergi lewat jalur yang tidak prosedural. Nah, itu status quo-nya. Lalu kita ingat tadi kita ada dalam saat dimana kita mau berubah ke yang baru, undangan baru, kita juga menanyakan ke mereka bagaimana rencana mereka ke depan. Kalau mereka ingin pergi lagi, bagaimana rencana mereka untuk menjalani proses itu. Ternyata pertama hanya 7% yang aware, yang tahu dari responden yang tahu bahwa undang-undangnya akan berubah. Bahwa landscape sendiri nanti akan segera berubah. Sebagian besar tidak tahu. Dan ketika mereka pun ditanya bagi mereka yang ingin migrasi mau kemana, bagaimana mereka, siapa yang akan mereka kontak kalau berikutnya mereka akan berangkat. Sebagian besar masih memilih 60% akan sponsor, 21% lewat PT, hanya 1,29% yang lain. Padahal kita tahu nanti landscape sudah sangat berubah. Sponsor tidak ada role-nya di situ di yang berikut, tapi ini adalah ya, apa yang mereka ekspektasikan mereka akan lakukan di ke depan. Nah, juga dari hasil interview kami juga PT yang harusnya berperan memberikan pelatihan ternyata tidak, pertama tidak semuanya menerima pelatihan, jadi ada 69% dari TKG yang melaporkan mereka menerima any pelatihan, jadi yang sebelum berangkat. Jadi sisanya tidak menerima pelatihan. Lalu ada sekitar 45% dari PMI yang melaporkan bahwa mereka mengikuti setidaknya pelatihan 2 minggu atau 10 hari training. Ini adalah set legal minimum yang sempat berlaku, dan kita tanyakan dan hanya 45% yang at least menjalani training seperti ini selama ini. Nah, kalau kita tanya secara lebih detail training apa yang mereka terima, ada hanya 60% yang menerima pelatihan tentang language, tentang tools, misalnya bagaimana cara menggunakan dishwasher, bagaimana menggunakan mesin rapi seperti itu. Ada sekitar hanya kurang dari 50% mendapatkan pelatihan tentang hak-haknya, tentang informasi tentang destinasi, tentang tujuannya. Kurang dari 20% mendapatkan pelatihan tentang bagaimana mencari pertolongan kalau ada masalah. Dan makin ke kanan hanya di bawah 30% yang mendapatkan pelatihan tentang asuransi yang sebenarnya bisa sangat membantu mereka untuk ketika berhadapan dengan masalah. Jadi ini isu di pelatihan yang kami dapat. Nah, bagaimana tentang biaya imigrasi? Kami menanyakan tentang menanyakan secara cukup detail tentang berapa yang mereka dapatkan, income yang mereka dapatkan, dan juga biaya-biaya yang harus mereka keluarkan. Kita mulai dari kiri. Dari kiri itu pendapatan yang mereka terima selama ini average-nya 24 bulan, 2 tahun. Pendapatan yang secara rata yang mereka terima selama 24 bulan adalah 136 juta dari salary-nya. Lalu pada umumnya dalam beberapa kasus mereka juga menerima ada income lain, apakah untuk waktu sign on atau waktu daftar, income tambahan sekitar 8,7 juta. Hingga total income-nya 144,7 juta. Tapi berapa banyak dari biaya tersebut yang kemudian yang sebenarnya keluar sebagai biaya migrasi mereka? 18,5 juta itu secara rata itu dipotong dari payroll deduction ya untuk biaya migrasi, dan itu di on top di atas 20 juta yang mereka secara rata keluarkan untuk upfront cost. Jadi ini kelihatannya struktur pembiayaannya, dan sehingga net income mereka dalam 2 tahun secara rata adalah sekitar 106,2 juta. Nah, lalu selain di luar kita tahu itu dari sisi moneternya, bagaimana dengan kondisi-kondisi lain tentang aspek non moneternya. Nah, kita banyak pertanyaan kita yang menanyakan hal ini secara lebih detail. Di sini kita tampilkan beberapa hasilnya, sekitar di atas 10% mengalami gajinya dipotong, 60% tidak mempunyai tidak mendapatkan day off, dan di atas 50% kerja lebih panjang dari 12 jam per hari. Sebagian besar dokumennya ditahan oleh employernya, tidak ada bayaran untuk overtime, dan sekitar 40% tidak diizinkan untuk pergi dari website. Di luar itu kami juga menanyakan tentang apakah mereka sendiri mengalami kekerasan baik verbal, physical, atau seksual. Dan ini kami tahu ini pertanyaan sensitif yang kita lakukan dengan cara diskret dengan amplop tertutup dan sama sekali tidak mereka si interviewer tidak punya akses ke respon mereka. Datangnya secara diskret. Ini adalah, jadi ini tadi dari mulai dari segi moneter dan non monetary maupun knowledge mereka tentang bagaimana keberangkatan. Nah, lalu sekarang saya akan memberikan mic ke Simone untuk cerita, untuk mulai membahas tentang bagaimana studi desain yang kita harapkan yang bisa membantu apa studi perbaruan.
Terima kasih. Thank you so much for having me. I hope the switch to English is okay for everybody. I'll try to talk slowly. Not my usual way of speaking, but I think I can do it. So I'm very happy to share to you study design. So, kind of keeping in mind those background facts that we just discussed. You were kind of asked this question to say, okay, well, what can we do to help improve some of those troublesome outcomes? And what's at the heart of the study? We had this initial hypothesis that the quality of the PT that a woman is migrating with is really important. And this is a hypothesis that we tested with our data in many different ways, and I just kind of want to make this point to you before I show you the interventions that we developed to help migrants find PTs with higher quality. On the x-axis here is a grade for different PTs that we structured out of survey data that we collected in 2015. We sort of pick grades to match the Indonesian grading system. So, PTs that are getting grades around 50 are kind of failures. They're very, very bad. Once we get up to 100, these are PTs that are performing really well. So these are the grades that I'll tell you more about how we shared these with migrant workers. But what I'm doing here is just graphing this against the number of problems that workers are having in different PTs in the N-line data that we just collected in 2019. So these are completely different women, kind of 4 or 5 years later. And what we see is there's a major difference, right? This is, the level is the fraction of problems with the employer that women are experiencing. Firman highlighted, I think we look at 18 different potential problems. And if you go with a very bad PT, women on average are experiencing problems 40% of the time. This goes down by about 20 percentage points when you move to a top PT. So it really does seem that the role of the PT is very important. And the other thing that we're very happy about looking at this is that the grades that we built in 2015 seem to really have a predictive value, which makes us feel good. So the problem that we saw in the field, and I should say we spent about 6 months doing qualitative research before we developed, even came up with the ideas for the interventions. And then we probably spent another 6 months doing qualitative research to inform the design of the interventions, because it was very important to us to make sure that the ideas we developed were relevant to the ground. And during that qualitative research, we identified 3 different information problems that really kind of hold migrants back from maybe making informed decisions. One is just in terms of outcomes. Women have maybe an idea of what pay looks like or what experience looks like, but every story is very different, and so they don't kind of have the big picture view of what happens when you migrate and how are those outcomes different when you go with a good versus a bad PT. So that's problem 1. Problem 2 is, well, how do I know which PT is good and which PT is bad? That's actually a really difficult thing to learn when the only people you can talk to are a small number of women in your village. And, problem 3 is that women were poorly informed about, what PTs are supposed to do. What are their rights? What should they be expecting from a good PT? And how are those roles or those services that the PT is supposed to provide going to help improve their migration experience later on? And so as part of this project, we decided to try to design a solution for each one of these different information frictions. So the first one took the form of an infographic. This is a screenshot of the first page. To give you an idea of what it looked like, we tried to make it very easy to understand. Essentially what it does is it shows the differences in outcomes for good and bad PTs across a range of different migration outcomes that migrants kind of told us they really cared about during the qualitative research. And in order to calculate these numbers, we use baseline data that was based on over 8,000 surveys with migrants in 400 villages where we conducted our study. Again, we thought it was really important to sort of show them data and stuff they told us was important to them and their experience. And it's kind of showing this is the difference between good and bad, right? To also help them understand, like, hey, if you go with a good PT, you're going to experience something different. That's solution 1. But then you have to help them find a good PT versus a bad PT. And so in order to address this, we developed a PT report card. So there's a picture of this on the left. And we tried to make this as familiar and easy to understand as possible. So the idea is to kind of model it on a school report card. We wanted to make sure that it was locally relevant because all PTs in Indonesia, I think there's around 400 or 500 of them, they don't place, they're sort of, they'll only work in certain geographies. So each kecamatan in our research study got a different report card that featured PTs that were actually doing placements in their area, right? So the idea is to make this information locally relevant and also well-grounded with data. We didn't have kind of data from at least 30 surveys with migrants at the baseline. We didn't show a grade for that PT because we were worried that it wouldn't be accurate, right? So we wanted to be well-informed. We tried to account for the MENA moratorium and ensure that each report card featured PTs that could send migrants to Asia. And we tried to create a comprehensive grade that was based on 11 different types of experience. Kind of a PT is going to get a higher grade if they do more of the training, if they treat the migrant better in the training center, if they work with a good agency, if the migrant is paid more, and if the migrant has fewer problems with her employer. And we kind of did a bunch of quantitative crunching, kind of using like academic literature on kind of how to do good ratings, for example, of teachers, and essentially converted this into a score that goes from about 50 to 95, and to just really hammer the point home. We also include a smiley face scale to kind of give a sense of which ones are good versus bad. That's the report card. And then solution 3 was really about kind of explaining, hey, this is what a PT is supposed to do for you. And this is why picking a good one is really important, and try to communicate that in a familiar, easy to understand way through a migrant story. So we developed a comic book that told the story of a potential migrant worker. I think this is a screenshot of one of the pages where somebody is kind of telling her what a PT is supposed to do and how one of the women in the story had a bad experience because she didn't get the training. It was really meant to illustrate this link between PTs and their experience working abroad. It also gave an example of like how should someone go about picking a PT given the way the migration market works, right? Now, Firman already showed you that the vast majority of women are migrating through sponsors. They don't kind of go to the government, look at a list and pick the best PT. What happens is somebody comes to the village and says, I have an offer for you. So how can you pick a better PT? Well, you have to wait. You have to reject an offer and pick another one later. So, the migrant worker in our story used that strategy to find a better PT. And then it is also kind of also sharing, what you should expect out of a good PT, so they understand that. So we're very interested in kind of understanding the effect of these interventions together, but also the effect of the different strategies on their own. And so this is the way we combine them in our study design. So we start with 400 villages in those 8 kabupaten that are very, very large migrant sending areas. And we randomly assigned 100 of those villages to the control group, which got no treatment. Those are the numbers that you saw earlier in the first half of the presentation. In the next group of 101 villages, migrant workers got the full package. They got that infographic, they got the report card, and they got the comic. In group 2, they got the infographic, and they got the report card only. And then in group 3, they got the infographic and just the comic book. So this allows us to understand the impact of different combinations of different types of information for workers. We kind of engaged in a pretty in-depth community facilitation process to share these materials with workers. I just want to tell you a little bit about how that worked. The first step was coordinating at the kabupaten, kecamatan, and village level, reaching out to a number of stakeholders, both within government, but also local migrant worker unions to ensure that everybody supported the work and information was shared. Then meet with community leaders to sort of discuss the upcoming activity. As part of this, we identified a local facilitator who was often a former migrant living in the village. She assisted with the group discussions and then was left with materials so that she could share them with interested women in the community after the community meetings were over. And then in each village, we conducted 3 community meetings together with Mitra Samya. We kind of targeted women that were 18 to 40 years old interested in migrating. Okay, and this is just sort of give you a picture of how this worked. It was meant to be very interactive discussion. This is an example from a comic book village where they kind of put the pictures of the comic book up on a board. And what they've been doing here is actually making a list of the different PT placing people in villages and having a discussion about how they're good versus how they're bad. Just under 30,000 women across 300 villages participated in these community meetings in 2015. So this project really has been a journey. I think we alluded to the timeline. The qualitative research actually took place at the end of 2013, 2014. Our baseline, computation of the rankings, and the intervention, those pictures I showed you was 2015. And since then, we've been following these workers. As part of the baseline, we identified a set of 4,800 women who told us, yes, I'm interested in migrating in the future. And one of the things that I think is very exciting about this study is we've been tracking what's been happening in their lives for the past 4 years. So we had one follow-up survey with these women in 2016, another one in 2017, and then in 2019 we just finished our final survey. And I think I'm mostly going to just show you data from this final survey, but we sort of have this ability to track their migration trajectories over time. So that sample, which I call the tracking sample, is the main sample that I'll show you results from. And sort of who we're sort of thinking about with the impact analysis. However, I also want to mention that we interviewed these 8,000 women at baseline for the purpose of the report cards. And at the end line, also to kind of help us understand how far information spread in the village, we identified and interviewed another 2,400 women who had migrated after sort of the start of facilitation, October 2015, to understand the additional reach of our interventions. So thank you for bearing with me. We now, after all of that, can kind of get to some of the preliminary results. As we've mentioned, this is what we see about 2 months after having received the final data. So we're excited to share more with everyone as our analysis progresses. But for today, I want to sort of focus on 2 things. And this is partially motivated by the fact that, as Firman explained, like there's in the process of rethinking the way the migration system works. And part of what we want to do with this study is unpack how different types of information, different types of interventions impact migrant worker outcomes so that we can kind of then inform the process of thinking through how one might share information and what information one might share. So the first goal is to say, what is the effect of the report card? I want to isolate that. Well, we have a way to do this in our experiment. And the way we do this is we compare group 1, which gets the 3 things. It gets the infographic, it gets the report card, and it gets the comic. Well, if I compare that to group 3 here, they only got the infographic and the comic, right? So the only difference between those 2 groups is the report card, right? So it lets us isolate that effect. We can also unpack the effect of the comic book in a very similar way, where we compare the group that got all 3 to the group that just got the infographic and the report card. Right here, the only difference is the comic book. So for this presentation, I'm going to focus on those 2 comparisons only. If you're interested in other comparisons, you can stay tuned as we continue to work on these results. I think the first thing you want to do with any project is to make sure that the intervention you tried actually worked and happened on the field. So we know that 30,000 people participated, but we want to make sure that they're the right ones. And so what we did at Endline is we asked them, hey, remember seeing this material, or do you remember going to a meeting about migrant workers in 2015? So some people may forget, but many of them still remember. And I also want to talk you through this graph to make sure you understand, because I'm going to use this graph many, many times in explaining the result. So these first 2 bars are about understanding the effect of the report card. And the way I do that is I say, okay, I want to know what is happening to the share of women who remember the report card in the comic-only treatment arm. So there's about 5% of women who say they've seen this thing before, but the number is very close to 0, which kind of makes sense because we didn't share the report card in the comic-only villages. And then I say, okay, well, what's the average in the comic plus report card villages? And you can see I'm kind of graphing the additional difference here on top of this line, so you can see how it compares. There, over 25% of women remember seeing this 3 years later. And for those of you that like statistics, maybe there's a few in the room, it's the former JPAL RAs, we kind of graph the confidence intervals, and so if those little whiskers there are outside of this dashed line, you know it's statistically significant. So we kind of see that there's a big jump in the number of people who remember the report card when we add that in, which is good. And the same thing happens with the comic, right? When we go from report card only to comic, there's a big, big increase in the share of women that say they remember the comic. So that makes us feel good, and then we can kind of move on to thinking about what are the impacts of these on migration behavior. So, kind of our first result, probably our biggest result, is the report card actually reduced the migration rate by 5 percentage points. So you can see that in comic-only villages, almost 40% of those 4,800 women who told us they were interested in migrating actually ended up going. I think this is actually very, very high. However, that share goes down by 5 percentage points when women have access to the report card. The comic, in comparison, had no effect on migration, and just to put this in perspective, I think around in 2018, 280,000 people migrated through Bangpay Dua TKI, okay? If we reduce the migration rate by 5 percentage points, that means it's about 33,000 fewer people leaving Indonesia every year, right? So not a trivial thing. Part of what we're working on now is to understand who are the people that are responding in this way. One of the things we see is that women that kind of have higher cognitive ability and greater locus of control, you can kind of think of this as a measure from psychology that is, like how empowered is somebody? Does somebody really believe that their choices matter? Those are the women that are reducing their migration the most in response to this information on the report card. I think some of you might be thinking, why would giving somebody information about the quality of a PT make them less likely to migrate? That seems sort of weird. And to understand that, I think we really need to think about the way the migration process works. As we've said earlier, most of the TKI use sponsors to migrate. That means these offers are coming sequentially over time, one by one. And so if you want to pick a good PT, you have to wait until a suitable offer arrives. And this means that the value of waiting might be higher when there are more PTs operating in your village, right? And you might actually want to wait less. So I think the easiest way for me to understand it is to almost think about decisions somebody may make when they want to get married, right? So imagine you really want to get married, and you're not allowed to meet any potential partner before you get married. Well, you might as well take the first offer that comes along because they all look the same to you, right? You want to get married, just go. Works that way in some places. Now imagine instead somebody says, oh, you can maybe do some dating, you can meet these people before you decide if you want to marry them. You might say, okay, let me get to know some people first. Maybe I want to shop around. I meet the first guy, I say, I think I can do better. That might mean it takes me longer to get married, right? Well, you can kind of think of the migration behavior of these TKI in a very similar way. And that's what we think is happening. But intuitively, there's only one guy in my village. He's my only option. I would probably get married pretty quickly, but if there are many, many people, that means I might spend more time searching, right? And what's nice is it gives us this prediction that when there's more choice in a village, we might see a bigger reduction in the migration rate from the report card. And this is something that we can test because we actually had this hypothesis before we started the study, so we measured at baseline how many of those PT are operating in each of those villages. And this is what we see. So this is kind of an index of PT choice. It has a fancy name called Herfindahl, which you probably will not care about unless you're an economist. But essentially what it means is when things get bigger, there's more and more choice in the village. And then what I'm doing is I'm graphing the share of women who are migrating in the comic and report card versus comic only against choice. And what you can see is that reduction is exactly concentrated in those villages where there's much more choice, which is kind of consistent with our hypothesis of women kind of waiting is a way of getting pickier, getting choosier. That's our second result. But that doesn't mean that nothing is happening in those low-choice villages. In fact, what we see in those low-choice villages is something very different, which is about impacts on non-procedural migration. I think Firman already shared some of the data about this. This is something we're very, very worried about. And we can look to see if our interventions change things. And what we see is that when women have access to the report card, this list of PTs that can take them the legal way, they're significantly less likely to migrate without a PT. And all of this impact is happening in those low choice areas. So, what that's telling us is that, when people have no choice, or it's very difficult for them to access the formal system, sometimes they resort to going the illegal or the improper way. When we give them a tool that helps them, kind of connect with a firm, that lets you go the legal way, they're less likely to do that, right? So the migration rate isn't changing, but the way that women are going abroad in these villages is, I think in a way that's very important for thinking about migrant welfare, because these women who go without a PT are, kind of not registered in a legal way and very, very vulnerable if something bad happens to them when they're abroad. Okay. So this is all very interesting to see, what happens to the migration rate. But we also care about what this means for women's well-being, right? And so I'll show you results kind of in three broad areas. The first is thinking about well-being and experiences during the pre-departure time, right? Did the report card or the comic change how well prepared women were before they migrated in the first place? And we collected many different measures of this, and so to kind of collapse it all into one measure and keep things easy to understand, what we've done is created sort of a pre-departure index that focuses on four key areas. The first is PT policies, like did the PT provide training Was the TKI allowed to go outside the migration center? Did the PT let the woman hold on to her personal documents? The next area is training quality. We sort of talked about some of the problems here, so we sort of look at the fraction of topics that the woman was actually trained on. Another issue is related to the contract. Did she actually sign a contract in Indonesian that she understood? And the last one is, also incorporating what women tell us themselves. We asked them to assign a grade that went from 0 to 10 overall to the PT. Hey, what did you think? So we take all of these 4 measures and basically turn them into a score ranging from 0 to 1. So you can kind of think of a 0 as a woman who kind of got none of these good inputs and said, my PT was the worst, it was a 0. A 1 would be she kind of gets everything she's supposed to and she rates her PT a 10 out of 10. And so what we see is that, experience is lacking in many ways. The average score is around about 0.5 or 50% of stuff. But both the comic and the report card increase the score, the quality of the preparation, by about, like 5 percentage points. So it seems that, when you, kind of give people the report card, the women who do migrate are, kind of receiving a better experience at the PT. But even the comic, which didn't change the migration rate itself, does seem to be directing women towards PT that are, sort of providing some better inputs from in the first place. That's our 4th result. And that's good. We want people to be better prepared. But the end goal is to make sure that what happens when they're migrating improves. So the first thing I do want to point out is there's absolutely no impact on occupation or earnings. So this is just, a graph of the main occupations across the different treatment arms. And you can see almost 80% of these women are working as domestic workers. That doesn't change. And consistent with that, we also see that earnings and pay doesn't change either. And one of the things I think is interesting is if you looked at the earlier graph that Firman showed you, only around 10% of women report they're paid less than their contract. So in a way, these results are sort of very consistent with the types of problems that women experience abroad. But where we do see an impact is on non-monetary aspects of the migration experience. So how do we measure that? Well, we take this index approach again. And it really includes 2 different things. The first is job quality and quality of life. So we pick all the indicators on our N9 survey that are unrelated to money and pay. So this is like, did you get at least a day off per week? Did your job match your contract? Did the employer let you keep your passport and your personal documents? Did you get proof of payment, and were you allowed to leave the house or the work site? We look to see if women are experiencing this. And we again also incorporate what they tell us themselves. We say, okay, well, on a scale of 0 to 10, what was your experience like? And again, the score is going to range from 0, so that's somebody who has the worst possible experience, up to 1. Kind of on average, the average experience is about 0.6 or 60% of things. And what we see is that the report card and the comments significantly improve women's non-monetary experiences by about 3 to 4 percentage points. So it's, I think it's a modest effect, but it's also an important effect, especially when you account for the fact that only 30% of people remember seeing these things in the first place. So it does seem that even if you're not being paid more, you're treated better when you're abroad, which I think is also consistent with information being able to sort of improve like protection and well-being, right? We also look to sort of say, okay, well, does this translate into changes once the woman comes home? Here we're still working, but we don't see any statistically significant impact on assets, or expenditures, which is consistent with people being paid more or less the same thing. We also don't see statistically significant impacts on mental health, but we'll sort of caveat that this is sort of the last set of results that we're able to look at before this presentation, so work is very much ongoing. But I think my view is this is a story of helping women make better choices about the PT. That translates into better preparation and potentially also translates into them getting connected to better employers who are kind of less likely to treat them poorly and follow kind of the official rules of employment. So those are all the results that we have to share now. I just want to conclude by thinking through a little bit of the policy implications. As we mentioned, the 2018 law or 2017 law is yet to be implemented, and so we see this as a time where we maybe have the opportunity to translate some of our findings into action. So what are the main takeaways? One is that information really matters. You give women relevant information about the quality of PTs and the migration process that they can understand. They act on that information in a way to improve their own well-being. And it kind of translates into a variety of different effects. It maybe slows down the migration rate as people become choosier, but it also reduces unofficial migration, non-procedural migration, and people are better prepared. But the thing to keep in mind is that choice really matters too. We see very different effects depending on how much choice over PTs women have in their villages. And there's questions of, how can we preserve information and choice? Well, the vision under UU 18 is to move very much more to a government-led system. And depending on how you do that, you can imagine this could really improve information that women have access to. For example, maybe when I show up to the kabupaten, I actually see a list of PTs with their rankings, and I understand what that means for me, or it could stifle it. If things are not explained, I walk into the kabupaten offices and somebody says, okay, you can go here, right? So we think that this is a really important time to think carefully about how to integrate information about both PT quality, but even the comic web, which, by the way, doesn't require kind of any specialized data collection, and we've already developed the materials. And it's really making the case to the migrant saying, hey, you should think carefully about these choices. That matters too for women's experiences. And so, I know that there may be some stakeholders in the audience. I think the next step on our side is to continue refining our results and exploring the broad range of impacts. We are also very excited to have further conversations with stakeholders working in this area in Indonesia, and I think we'll all be in touch about that. And we're also very happy to start having a discussion today in this room for all of you. So I think I'll turn over the floor to our moderator, and we can get started.
Thank you so much. Very interesting presentation. So let's start.
Just thank you, and I think there's so many research associates from JPAL that worked on this project. I don't think all of them are there, but just to say thank you to everyone who has supported this research. It's been a real journey, and it's been so wonderful to go on it with all of you, so we're really grateful. Okay.
Ya, terima kasih buat Mas Firman dan Simone untuk presentasinya yang sangat menarik. Saya sangat suka itu bagian analogi dengan managed market. Mungkin kita perlu minta report card nih buat para calon-calon kalau mau menikah. Jadi mungkin karena waktu kita yang cukup terbatas, masih ada waktu ya. Jadi mungkin karena saya moderator, jadi saya mau menggunakan privilege saya sebagai moderator untuk mengajukan dua pertanyaan pertama. Jadi mungkin pertanyaan pertama adalah kenapa komik selain maksudnya kan ada berbagai macam cara untuk memberikan informasi, kenapa akhirnya memutuskan kita akan bikin komik. Terus yang kedua, ini saya tahu ini bahwa masih preliminary analysis, tapi salah satu hal yang dilihat kan mengenai abuse pada saat mereka bekerja. Saya nggak tahu apakah analisa sudah dilakukan mengenai abuse tersebut. Tapi apakah ada perubahan dalam hal kejadian-kejadian yang seperti itu? Karena kalau kita bicara soal migrasi perempuan, kalau kita lihat berita kan itu yang biasanya yang muncul, yang menjadi hotspotnya itu adalah kejadian-kejadian seperti itu. Jadi mungkin itu dulu untuk pemanasan, pertanyaan pemanasan.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'll just repeat them in English just to make sure I completely understand. So the first question is why did you choose the comic? So I think for this, it's really all about the qualitative research that we did. Information provision is like an interesting area of research in that, sometimes you can see information matters a lot and sometimes it matters very little. So, it's like this English expression, the devil is in the details. You need to do a very good job of communicating the information in a way that people understand that is compelling. And so we spent a lot of time talking to women, trying to understand how they thought and, kind of how they understood things. And I think one way that is very kind of helpful with this particular group is remember, only half of them have graduated secondary school. So this is a group that has pretty low levels of education. It's often easier to understand things through stories. I mean, even the marriage story is a story that maybe I hope helps some of you understand our economic theory, that in a paper it'll be a model that nobody can understand. But if you tell the right story, it really helps somebody understand what's happening. And so we opted for that approach to really kind of put the information in a story that somebody can relate to and they can see the connection within their own lives to make it as relevant as possible. And I think spending the 6 months talking to people, and even with the comic, it was like another 6 months of focus groups where we'd start with the first story, and it was like, how do people respond to the story? Are they understanding it? Is the name of the character right? Is the way that we've drawn it right? All of that went into to the development. So in terms of abuse, I think this is a very long and complicated conversation. So in the results I showed you, we actually don't include it in the experience index just because I think I didn't mention this, but some of the women that are in that tracking sample are still abroad, and we interviewed them over the phone. And our judgment was we can't ask those questions to a woman in a phone interview. We're just not going to get the right data, so we kind of have less sample to look at that. When we do, we don't see any significant change in experience of abuse. And it's a really challenging question, I think, when you're thinking about these domestic workers, because they're living in somebody's home. And it's really kind of the job of that agency to do screening of the employers, and I think that risk is always going to be there, but I think part of our theory of change for how information might help is better PTs are going to have better agencies that do more employer screening, and if something bad does happen, they have a way of doing recourse. But I think there's also really important policy discussions to be had, outside the area of our research, just in terms of thinking about how engaged Indonesian mission is, and to what extent should we be supporting this kind of migration where women are living in the homes of their employers and don't have access to their documents, which is really important to think about as well.
Thank you. Jadi mungkin sekarang saya buka pertanyaan ke the floor. Jadi boleh nanya bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris, kita ada translator, tapi mungkin nggak bisa bahasa Jawa. Karena translatornya bisa bahasa Jawa, nggak bisa. Jadi bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris, kecuali Mas Firman mau terjemahin. Jadi ya sudah ada satu. Ada lagi, mungkin kita ambil 3 pertanyaan. Pertama, 2, 3. Oke. Oke, jadi mungkin kita mulai dari yang paling depan dulu. Silakan.
Ya. Ya, terima kasih. Saya Wahyu Susilo dari Migrant. Kita pernah juga bikin riset serupa ya soal ini dan hasilnya memang seperti yang tadi disampaikan, mayoritas teman-teman migrant worker atau calon migrant worker itu channeling yang ke sponsor, ke PT gitu ya. Tapi ke public service itu jarang sekali. Sehingga kalau kita, karena kita riset atau survei itu langsung harus melakukan jalan keluar, kemudian kita membangun namanya des bumi, dan untuk kemudian menjawab persoalan channeling itu kita bikin namanya pusat pelayanan terpadu. Itu hanya informasi aja yang ada di desa-desa seperti itu. Nah, pertanyaan saya terkait dengan survei ini kan, durasi survei ini tahun berapa, Mas?
Waktu yang awalnya tahun 2015, lalu beberapa kali melakukan kunjungan ulang, dan terakhir tahun 2019 yang terakhir.
Ya, karena saya datang agak terlambat, saya belum melihat ya, atau mungkin belum melihat presentasi misalnya impact dari moratorium, apakah juga teman-teman itu juga mengetahui ada moratorium itu atau tidak gitu ya. Kemudian juga komparasi dengan mereka yang berangkat ke Asia Timur, mungkin akan menarik ya kalau itu juga mengukur tingkat pengetahuan mereka tentang kebijakan-kebijakan yang seharusnya memang mereka tahu, tapi memang kalau hipotesa kita, hampir semua teman-teman kita yang ada di akar rumput itu nggak tahu gitu ya. Apalagi misalnya kalau survei itu dicek dengan situasi sekarang, di mana ada 3 peraturan yang bertubrukan mengenai penempatan Timur Tengah. Jadi kalau menurut Firman 260 tahun 2015 masih ada penghentian permanen ke 19 negara, tapi kemudian pada tahun yang lalu pemerintah membuka namanya One Channel System, penempatan uji coba penempatan ke Timur Tengah, yang kemudian ini dibawa oleh calo-calo itu ke desa bahwa Timur Tengah sudah buka. Padahal pemerintah juga belum mencabut Permen 260 seperti itu. Jadi mungkin kalau ini dicek lagi ke situasi pedesaan, situasi teman-teman ya yang kebanyakan di pedesaan yang mau kerja ke Timur Tengah, mereka akan makin bingung dengan situasi seperti ini. Yang terakhir mungkin saya juga ingin mengkonfirmasi ya, misalnya apakah mereka mengakses juga layanan-layanan aplikasi-aplikasi yang dibuat oleh teman-teman, oleh Kemenaker, oleh PNB 2 TKI, oleh Kemlu, oleh yang lain-lain seperti itu. Kita tahu ada aplikasi TKI cerdas, ada aplikasi Safe Travel, ada aplikasi SIPMI atau macam-macam seperti itu. Jadi juga untuk menguji apakah sebenarnya aplikasi-aplikasi itu bermanfaat atau tidak. Karena kalau kita kemarin memeriksa satu-satu aplikasi ini, hanya 0,000% yang mengakses itu. Misalnya kalau kita pakai jumlah TKI kita itu 6 juta, itu aplikasi tertinggi dari aplikasi terkait migrant worker itu adalah Safe Travel. Ternyata pendownload dari aplikasi ini hanya sekitar 65.000. Jadi nggak ada 1% pun, 0, sekian persen. Saya kira itu. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak. Selanjutnya, seperti yang saya kenal.
Terima kasih, selamat pagi semuanya.
Oh iya, sebelum itu saya mohon, tadi saya lupa bilang, jadi mohon disebutkan nama, terus institusi afiliasi dan pertanyaannya.
Oke, terima kasih. Welcome back, Simone. Good to see you again, Firman. It's very great to be here. Recently, law I was studying many years. Really very nice to see you. Looking forward for more what you're going to cover from the last era. I think it is confirmed by the like what the finding that you want there, the importance of information. I think what I would like to emphasize is like understanding information. That's about things. First is about the contents, second is about the modes, and the third is about who actually deliver. Because sometimes even the same message might be received differently if it's from somebody that you trust or you know and something like that. So I don't know whether this is something when you deliver ice in the ground, because it might, I don't know, I mean, it might get an impact on how the receive of those messages and how it impacts how I think when you just finished and the Scotland asked about the number of the migrant workers, I don't know, but the fact that actually like almost 100% people having goods in Indonesia is something, right? So actually like in addition to what you're already trying out there, we from the World Bank also work with the East Asia Pacific Gender Innovation Lab, also funded by the conducting another survey on how to reach out the migrant workers through SMS text and entertainment. So I think this is also trying to get those groups focused and having the, like the mobile phone access to mobile phone. They know, how to reach out and get information. And on top of that, I also agree with you because many of these migrant workers, they're like low educated people. So we need to make it very simple and entertaining sometimes. So that's why we also try to play them and playing a movie about the migrant. Like documented or undocumented. I think it's going to be, we also work with the supermeter in fact for the analysis for this. So actually maybe it's going to be, I think, complementary. I mean, if we can like combine what we found from the study and what we found, it's going to be useful hopefully. I also echo colleague from the questions earlier about there are so many existing applications that are already there. And I think it's there must be a way that those people really, know or they don't know. So I mean, like maybe the fact that the reasons why this unfortunately low number of the people is actually access that because they do not know that exists. So maybe in one of the informations, I don't know that we also need to say, like not only informing. This is the tools that we provide to you, but this is also other existing tools that will be useful for you. And how it may impact if you receive different information from different sources. I don't know whether it is better or bad. Maybe this is something maybe interesting for us to see. Maybe the government needs to streamline the information and try to make it more consistent one to the other, right? Instead of 10 applications, but none of them really complete or something like that. But it's thinking through maybe is something that we can do later or we can do later. This is related to information. And this is also about the passive and active. Because the one that we did, you did and we did, is more about active reaching out to the migrant workers to get the information. And it seems that there are still so many people that passive. There are information out there, but they do not really make an effort to reach out the information to themselves, right? So this is also another way how to inform them to make it more proactive and doing it. Following up on the impact of this information, right? I don't know whether you also migrant workers who already come back and how those that have a good access to the TP also impact the way how they integrate when they come back. I mean, returning, right? Because that's also something that the government would like to know, right? Is that we really need to have a very good reintegrations program to help them better when they come back and then what they get into next, right? I don't know if you follow up in your
Ya, thank you. Tadi kalau saya udah kenal, tapi mungkin boleh dibilang nama dari institusinya.
Sorry, maaf, Ririn dari World Bank.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Ririn dari World Bank. Yang berikutnya Bapak yang di belakang.
Thank you. My name is Victor. I'm from public. I want to ask the speakers, as economists, Indonesia has perhaps 4 startups with valuation unicorn. In this 4.0 era, do you have any research related to? I'm wondering why we are still sending migrant worker overseas. We have 4 unicorns. Why don't we create a job in the country? And according to PricewaterhouseCoopers, by the time 2050 or 30, will be the 6th largest economy in the world. Do you have any details on that? Thank you.
Okay, so who's going to take first? Okay, Mas Firman.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Bapak dan Ibu pertanyaannya. Yang pertama saya akan mencoba menjawab pertanyaan Pak Wahyu Sucipto. Poin pertama sebenarnya bukan pertanyaan tapi informasi yang Bapak sampaikan tadi tentang program bersih. Kami juga pada sejak awal kami ikut mengikuti dan juga saya pernah hadir dalam satu presentasi tentang itu. Memang kita share interest dalam soal beberapa pentingnya informasi sampai ke migran yang konten maupun jenis informasi yang diperlukan bisa sampai ke migran. Nah, untuk pertanyaan yang pertama yang soal moratorium impact-nya, kami turun tahun 2015 dan moratorium sudah terjadi dan memang jadi kalau saya bisa lihatkan timeline-nya. Dan juga kita turun di 2015 dan saat moratorium sudah terjadi. Tapi kalau tadi kita ingat presentasinya Simone tentang surveinya, baseline sampel yang tahun 8.000 ini tahun 2015 itu adalah mereka-mereka yang sudah pulang dan sebagian besar dari sana, sebagian besar banyak dari mereka yang juga pulang dari MENA. Bahwa pada saat itu kemudian keberangkatannya memang terpengaruh moratorium itu juga kami berhasil kami tangkap. Bahkan setelah moratorium tadi sempat kami perlihatkan masih ada juga TKI yang kami sampel yang dan kalau dari baseline ini kita benar seperti yang Bapak sampaikan, kita sebenarnya bisa melihat dan kita bisa lihat banyak perbedaan dari karakteristik dari pengalaman mereka di luar negeri maupun karakteristik dari mereka yang berangkat dari data itu ada dan kami tangkap itu. Nah, kemudian yang dan kami dengan BNP 2 TKI juga mencoba membantu mereka bekerjasama dengan mereka mencoba memvisualisasikan data admin mereka dari periode yang kami pilih dan kelihatan juga perubahan kelihatan sekali dari sisi data admin yang migrasi yang melalui jalur formal itu kelihatan perubahan yang lumayan drastis dari mereka di connect maupun kita. Nah, yang kedua soal peraturan yang tumpang tindih, soal kemana soal itu juga dalam proses kita melakukan ini juga kami selalu setiap kali kami membaca hal-hal seperti itu kami sampai menanyakan lagi apakah benar ini moratorium sudah dicabut. Bahkan dari sisi kami pengamat juga kesimpang siuran itu juga kami lihat, oh apa benar sudah dicabut, oh belum. Itu saya bisa bayangkan di lapangan situasinya akan tentu jauh lebih kompleks. Dan yang ketiga tentang penggunaan apps. Ya kita pada saat SS itu keluar, kami juga mencoba mendownload dan mengoperasikannya. Ada yang gampang, ada yang mudah. Pertanyaan kami juga sama, berapa banyak sebenarnya pada akhirnya siapa yang akhirnya menggunakan ini, berapa banyak yang akhirnya menggunakan, dan itu juga jadi saya antara heran dan tidak heran juga ketika mendengar dari Pak Wahyu bahwa penggunaannya take up-nya dari apps itu masih sangat rendah. Saya pikir itu saja yang jawaban mungkin yang
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so thank you so much for all the comments. And I think, as you were sort of saying about access to information, it really resonates with what we see. I don't know if you saw the slide where over 2 years later, only 7% of women even know that the law has changed. And like less than 2% are saying, I'm going to go to the government the next time I migrate. So I think our results are very much in line with yours, that the information is key and it's not getting out there. And I think there are some real complementary areas of agreement and overlap in the questions, right? So Firman is also sort of saying maybe information matters, and we're kind of thinking about what's the right channel to get it out there. I think what is clear is that the current situation is not a good situation. And I think we sort of have different groups that are producing different kinds of research, and I really hope, especially over the next 6 months, as the Migrant study comes out as well, we can sit together and have conversations to really think about, as the implementation of the new law is put together, how can we work together to combine our knowledge to help make policy better, right? What is the information? And you're kind of touching on how should we be delivering it? I think our project was much more about trying to understand the value of information about, one, the quality of the PT, and can we kind of help migrants feel empowered to act on that, sort of through the comic book. We really enjoyed working with Mitra Samia, but that's not the scalable solution, right? So I think, you have more expertise maybe in how to make something happen on the field. So I really hope that we can keep having these conversations to maybe think about how we can combine all of our knowledge to improve things on the ground. I totally share that. I think the comment about the impact on how people integrate, that's a great one. And there's a lot of online data, we do have some questions about that we just haven't analyzed yet. It is right, we don't see an impact on mental health. There may be some changes in the occupation that we're still trying to understand, but that will definitely be a focus of the work going forward. Maybe I would just highlight one other thing where I think in some way or another, all the questions touched on, applications or technology, and what's the role of technology in this process. And I think it's a really interesting question that I think we need to have more conversations about, because the future of Indonesia, the direction is clear, right? And that there's a tremendous amount of innovation, as you were saying, things are going digital, but the reality of migration on the ground today is very different, right? Again, half these women have not graduated secondary school. Maybe many of them have smartphones. That's a question we can answer, but we need to make sure that as we keep our eyes on tomorrow, we're not forgetting about the needs of women today. And while technology is maybe a part of that process, I would, also argue that we kind of have to think of it from the migrant perspective and not think that can maybe solve everything. Good more to add. Like why are we still sending people overseas? Well, I think so. I mean, I think that is a question that is important in the policy discourse, and I'm Firman, maybe you're a little more plugged in there as well.
Ya, kita tahu bahwa visi ke depan yang dari BNP 2TKI itu di 2PMI dan khususnya Kemenaker untuk mengirim itu adalah mencoba bergeser dari low skill ke yang lebih high skill keluarga, dan itu sudah jadi agenda cukup lama. Tapi memang lagi seperti Simone sampaikan, kenyataan yang di lapangan kita juga masih punya kondisi migran yang low skill masih besar, dan bagaimana sekarang PR kita untuk saat ini, untuk hari ini adalah membuat mereka yang berangkat dengan lebih keselamatan lebih dijamin, well-being yang lebih tinggi sebelum kemudian kita semua yang dikirim adalah semua yang lain.
Terima kasih Mas Firman, Simone. Sekarang mungkin karena kita masih ada waktu cukup banyak, mungkin kita bisa mengambil pertanyaan yang sedikit lebih banyak. Mungkin kita buka 3 atau 4 pertanyaan berikutnya. Siapa? 1, 2, 3. Ada lagi? 4. Jadi mungkin oke, ya, tamu lain di sebelah sana. Don't forget name and institution.
Look, I'll just ask you out loud.
Okay.
I'm Stuart from the Mum Food Program, which is a quite large women's empowerment program funded by the Australian government. I was very lucky to have read the qualitative research that you did back in 2015 as part of designing the survey. One of the interesting things that caught my attention in that report was that many of the women who were interviewed talked about this sense of takdir, that they felt that their views didn't really matter, and that they also doubted that the choice of PT would have any impact whatsoever on their migration experience. So I guess my question is, you talked a little bit about the locus of control in the end line, and that it seemed to be women who scored higher on that index were benefiting more from the report card and the comic, if I'm not mistaken. But can you talk a little bit more to that point? What exactly is in that locus of control, and is there anything about this sense of disempowerment that you saw in that qualitative research that you can sort of follow up in the same line?
Yang berikutnya tadi siapa? Oh ya.
It's interesting that you use report cards so that you can see from the user experience about how their migration and how they perceive about it. You might have known about ratings done by the BNP 2TKI. Have you had a chance to see both scores, and then whether do they contradict or do they give the same result?
Nama dan institusinya Mbak?
Avi, Burbank.
Oke, berikutnya
Nama saya Yogi dari Migrant. Mohon maaf saya terlambat tadi, jadi mungkin melewatkan beberapa slide. Pertanyaan saya lebih kepada apakah studi ini juga melihat adanya korelasi antara preferensi negara tujuan dengan kualitas dan pengalaman para pekerja migran yang ingin berangkat ke luar negeri. Terima kasih.
Terus ada yang satu, boleh tunjuk lagi tangannya? Atau, oh ya, boleh.
I have a question regarding the you said that there are no impact on the. I would expect that after giving the information and then after knowing which PD, good PD and bad PD, and then when they for those, especially for those women, interfere at the baseline and then they migrate again or between the periods. I would expect that after getting this information, then they will have a kind of a bargaining position with the employer on the not necessarily on the salary, but probably on the, because sometimes they will not receive all the salary that you told some of the salary. So is there any like withholding salary or reduction in the one that you see from those who have before, those who treatment those migrated in 2009?
Terima kasih. Mungkin
Sure, I'll start and then maybe you can add on. Okay, so the first question was about this idea that came up in the qualitative research and the emphasis that women put on, am I going to kind of have a good or a bad fate? I have to say that's actually one of the reasons we developed the comic book, which was not part of the original vision of what we had for the project, but after doing that research, I think it became clear to us that even giving people a reason to think like this is why my choices could matter was potentially very important. So maybe I can tell you a little bit more about this locus of control. It kind of actually gets to this idea. It's an index that is often used by psychologists to measure the extent to which people think they have power over their own lives. So I think at the baseline, we had an index with maybe like 8 questions, and there are questions like, do you agree or not with statements like, I feel that my choices have, impact on me, or things just happen, it doesn't matter what I choose. And so it's like, it's been sort of validated in many different contexts, but it is kind of exactly getting to that idea. I should say that at the baseline, we also asked some of the women whether or not they thought, the PT choice mattered, and many say no, but we only asked that of former migrants, so kind of looking at the downstream impacts there is a little harder. The question about can we follow up in the end line is great. We actually did, so we were interested to see if this changed locus of control. We don't see any significant impacts on that, subject to the caveat that a lot of this work is still ongoing, but it doesn't seem that it's necessarily, changing things, there. There was a question about the Witoelar's report cards. So I think you're referring to when we actually gave some inputs to them on what should go into that report card. So I should say this project has been a really long journey, but we have made efforts as best we can to ensure that there's been kind of policy contribution and impact throughout. So, we sort of counted up, I think we've had over 22 meetings with Witoelar over the life of the project, and we've been using our data collection to give, some real-time technical advising. So that was one of the conversations we had. We had made our report card, and they had questions for us, what input, what should we be putting into our own report card. I think we checked correlation was there. You remember this? Okay, yeah. So there was actually like a pretty good relationship between those two, and we're grateful we were able to have some inputs there. I don't think I completely got the correlation, the question from Migrant here, the correlation between the TKI. Maybe you can take that one. Yeah, sorry, the translation, understanding it. Okay, and then the question from Bubandan about might this change the bargaining position with the employer is a really great question, because you have to say this was kind of our hypothesis as well. And there was a puzzle, but I think the answer, if I can navigate through these slides, is that when you look at the problem, and this was a surprise to me, I guess this is why it's always good to collect data, sometimes you're surprised. One of the rarest problems, like lower than being verbally abused by your employer, is reporting having a salary cut. So it actually seems that, though these migrants are facing many problems, most people are actually paid what they're supposed to. This may be because the PT plays a role in intermediating it, and the salaries are kind of set, kind of on a contractual basis in terms of if I'm a TKI going to Taiwan to work as a housemaid, I'm supposed to have this salary. So my kind of hunch for why we don't see as many impacts on salary is this is actually a piece of the process where the rules are being followed a little bit more than some of the other parts.
Yeah, I want to add about the question about the ratings that PNP TKI also had at the time. And it's true that we are in constant conversation with them in terms of developing rating and giving inputs to the rating. And I think, if I remember correctly, the other rating is different from us in the sense that the rules are take into account more into account what are the requirement that PT has to have or I have to fulfill. And it's really nice that our rating actually comes from the users, and this rating comes from the other side, and it lines up pretty nicely. It's not perfect correlation, but there are a strong correlation between two different ratings. I think, and untuk Mas Yofi, Pak Yofi dari Migrant Care, kita punya data tentang kemana mereka pergi, tapi memang belum kita tidak menganalisa itu, tapi jelas untuk setiap responden kita tahu persis kemana mereka pergi dan kita bisa.
Sorry, I kept looking at time just to make sure that we have time. So we have around almost 20 minutes, so probably we can take around four more questions. Okay, 1, 2 more. This is like option. Okay, let's start first.
Thank you. I'm Lily from Hong Kong. I'm wondering if you also collect information about who actually influenced the women's decision to migrate. Because I'm curious also related to information, whether you also need to target those people who might influence the decision to migrate.
Berikutnya, Bapak.
Terima kasih. Saya Wiki dari Samia. Pak Firman. Jadi saya ingat studi ini tahun 2015 ya. Jadi ada satu hal yang masih terbayang. Sebenarnya pada saat implementasi di lapangan ada hal penting tentang penjelasan komik ya dan kartu rapor. Jadi itu dilakukan oleh para fasilitator. Memang pada waktu itu ada asisten fasilitator yang dari lokal fasilitator. Nah, pasca studi ini tentunya pertanyaan kita adalah siapa yang kemudian akan memerankan peran penting dari fasilitator. Karena kunci dari tersampaikannya informasi yang ada baik dalam komik maupun kartu rapor adalah peran dari fasilitator. Mungkin itu saja Mas Firman, terima kasih.
I'll do that one maybe. We'll split them. Yeah, so I think that's a great question in terms of who influences the decisions to migrate. So we have, I think, some questions that are related to that, and that we ask. We ask if they have permission from various people, because you actually need to get permission from your parents or your husband in order to migrate. And we also know for women that don't migrate or reject offers to migrate, the number one reason they're not going is because somebody's not giving them permission. And we also collected information on, are you getting any advice about what PT to choose or which sponsor to choose in your community? Are you seeking or receiving any advice? And then who's that advice coming from? So I don't have those numbers to share right now, but I think one of the things that we really hope, we've collected so much data, and I think there's the results from the randomized trial, but I think a lot of just the information about what's happening is really important too, and so we definitely want to share those results and help other partners. If there's ways that our data can help answer your questions, we want to be available for that. So I think that's definitely something that we hope to look into and would love to share later.
Untuk pertanyaan Pak Widi, ya betul bahwa pada saat kita lakukan integrasi implementasi waktu itu community meetings, peran dari fasilitator pada saat itu memang penting untuk menyampaikan pesan-pesan kita, dan kemudian kita juga menggunakan dokumen untuk kemudian mereka terus jelaskan. Tapi memang di dalam desain sendiri kita tidak melakukan dan tidak ada resource untuk tetap mengkeep fasilitator itu terus mengambil peran yang sama buat di project. Jadi menjawab pertanyaan Pak Widi, memang itu pada saat intervensi saja kita menggunakan fasilitator.
Mungkin bisa jadi PR pemerintah untuk mikirin siapa fasilitator berikutnya. Jadi di 15 menit terakhir mungkin kita masih bisa mengambil ada waktu atau dengeran suaranya. Jadi masih ada waktu buat 3 pertanyaan lagi. Atau sudah habis semua pertanyaannya? Sudah atau mungkin bukan pertanyaan, mungkin mau komentar, mau pernyataan. Kalau tidak ada, ini panggilan terakhir, apa saya perlu hitung 1, 2, 3? Nggak perlu kan? Jadi kalau tidak ada, mungkin kita sudahi sesi ini. Jadi kita mungkin tepuk tangan dan terima kasih kepada pembicara. Dan saya ingin mengakhiri sesi seminar kita juga dengan mengucapkan terima kasih kepada para pihak-pihak yang sudah sangat berjasa terhadap proses studi ini, mulai dari inception-nya sampai completion-nya, yaitu DFAT, Survey Matter, dan juga Mitra Samya, di mana tanpa ketiga organisasi tersebut studi ini tidak akan berjalan dengan semulus ini. Jadi mungkin kita juga tepuk tangan buat mereka. Jadi dengan demikian saya tutup seminar ini. Terima kasih atas partisipasi dan kehadirannya. Jadi saya kembalikan ke MC kita.